Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you come across this video. And we'd like to welcome you to the next chapter in The Grand Design Exposed, authored by John Daniel, called The Freemasonry Metamorphosis. And before we get into the chapter, I want to do a backtrack all the way towards the beginning of the book. I want to read a couple of paragraphs because what we talked about in chapter 2 and the last parts of chapter 1, or what this book talked about, was the aspect of the word Protestant. Okay? Folks, there was protests from a clear personal vendetta standpoint, and there was protests in a religious sense, in her unscriptural dogmas and doctrines. And in chapter 9, we're going to come to a part in the chapter that is called Protestant Freemasonry Goes Public. Okay? And I've said this over and over again throughout, how we're going to come to the point where Freemasonry is discussed. And you're going to hear the term Protestant Freemasonry. And this is why it was very important to lay the groundwork in chapters 1 and 2, specifically in chapter 2 regarding the Knights Templar. Now, I want to go, and if you haven't listened to those first 2 chapters, I strongly advise that you go and listen to those first 2 chapters, or listen to them again to get a refresher. Because I'm just going to read a paragraph or 2 out of these first 2 chapters to basically rehash as to where we are now in chapter 9. And this paragraph comes from page 15 in chapter 1 of the book. And it states, the word Protestant means in a religious sense to protest Rome, her atrocities, her abuses, and her unscriptural doctrines. However, the protester of Rome fell into 2 main categories. The one group that everyone knows of are those who protest from a firm scriptural viewpoint. The second group were those who had a personal vendetta or grudge against Rome without any scriptural consideration. It is this group especially that we want to intensely identify, who no one has the vaguest idea about, that are a complete historical mystery, and yet were to quietly and drastically change the course of the whole world. But the fact remained, to protest Rome, whether king or peasant, meant swift and exact punishment. The profound question is, how could anyone shake themselves from the tyrannies of Rome? The answer lies in the history of this mysterious second group. And obviously this mysterious second group was the Knights Templar. And without recovering the history of this, again, you're going to have to listen to chapter 2. We'll just plain and simple that these personal vendettas that the Templar had, although the Templars maintained their aristocratic mindsets, they still protested against Rome via a personal vendetta standpoint. And they were ruthlessly persecuted, they were ruthlessly tortured in the Inquisitions and these types of things, and they were forced to move underground. And there was a lot of scuffling, and when they moved underground, they really gained a stronghold in the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, England. And within the second chapter of this book, and also by just doing some extra research, you're going to find out that these rogue Templars basically moved underground and was responsible for a lot of these things, like the peasant uprising. They were the ones that stirred the pot. Okay, and it's these rogue Templars that paved the way for what is called Protestant Freemasonry. Even though it sounds biblical, and this form of Freemasonry sounds biblical, but all it was a resurrection of the Templar, in a sense, to protest against Rome. And eventually the Jesuits will come in and, not trying to spoil everything here, and infiltrate this secret society. As a matter of fact, it's no mystery that one of the degrees is the Templar degree. Okay? So, or the Templar level. And I want to read another paragraph in chapter 2 called "The Knights Templar Paves the Way for Protestant Reformation." And I'm going to start in the first paragraph of page 18 and continue to the last paragraph of this section here in chapter 2 before we go into chapter 9. The orders of knights were established. 1. The Knights of Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, later to become the Knights of Malta, who took care of the sick and the physical needs of the pilgrims. The other were the Knights of Templar, who became the military arm for defense and protective escorts for pilgrims traveling to and from the city. The Knights Templar history is one of extreme importance and becomes one of the most fascinating stories ever to be researched. As the first order of men becoming military monks, they became the role model for every succeeding military order afterwards. The meteorite-like career in their rise to power, wealth, and fame was as legendary and sensational as the tragic and grisly manner they were brought to their end, or at least their visible end. Mystery, intrigues, and cover-ups surround their demise, and it is in this atmosphere that presents a great paradox today, especially when considering the parties involved during the founding of the United States of America. It would be very hard to find a greater contrast when comparing the principles on which the Roman Catholic Church is ruled alongside those which the American Republic was founded. Catholicism is controlled through the rule of one, who has been invested with infallible, absolute, and ruthless dictatorial powers, compelling all to fully submit, with all democratic processes banished and condemned. On the other hand, the American Republic extended to its people the right as individuals to think, to express themselves unobstructed, to be ruled by a government whose laws were for the people and by the people, that they might live and move and worship freely in peace and unmolested. Okay, now pay attention here. John Carroll was a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest. George Washington was a quote-unquote Protestant Freemason. They indeed, according to the principles they each represented, were supposed to be opposed to one another. Instead, they worked in perfect harmony together in laying out Washington, D.C., the city and seat of our nation's government, and in conjunction with, and at the very same time, founded the first Jesuit college in the States, known today as Georgetown University. As we progress further in our study, it will be shown the hidden connections between the Roman Catholic Knights Templar and Freemasonry, Protestant Freemasonry, mind you, and how the Jesuits infiltrated this Protestant Freemasonry, then by creating a secret society within a secret society, founded their Order of the Illuminati. Okay, so just because the Jesuits infiltrated this Freemasonry, which we are going to discover in chapter 9, and it was Protestant Freemasonry, so titled, so called, but really what it is, when that section talks about Protestant Freemasonry going public, really what it is really the resurrection, in a sense, of the Knights Templar, because they were underground creating these societies and having lots to do with the events surrounding their time after their expulsion and after their betrayal, when they were forced to move underground. So that's why I wanted to cover these couple of paragraphs to basically give us a rehash as we start chapter 9, the Freemasonry Metamorphosis. And the first section is called Jacobite Intense Resentment. The true God, the God of love and creation, has provided for each person on earth, whether the poorest of the poor, and of whatever race, certain unalienable rights, not to be argued, transferred, or revoked by any other man. But the aristocrat and his insatiable obsession to rule over others, through his divine right tyrannical religious and monarchical systems, demand that these God-given rights be denied. To make matters worse, those he rules over are snubbed and humiliated by his wealth and power, and his so-called noble birth. A line is drawn between the noble and ignoble classes, as broad as that which separates liberty from slavery. The exclusiveness of the noble aristocratic class is intolerable. During the Middle Ages, the peasant was doomed to perpetual insults and scorn. There was no redress of injuries. Noble pride of birth was carried to romantic extravagances. The arrogant aristocrat had no pity or compassion for the poor and miserable. The most beautiful peasant girl could never rise above her drudgeries, nor did she ever dream of rising. For members of the baronial family, from a child up she was taught, were as superior beings. But I believe there is a sublime message given by the Creator of nature to his downcast people, even the most lowliest worm in the dirt. He can transform into a gorgeous winged butterfly. The peasant under the feudal system belonged to his master as completely as if he could be bought and sold. Peasants had no rights, only duties. Simple pleasures, just to shoot with his bow and arrow a pheasant or hare on his own ground, were prohibited, as was picking up the droppings of the nobleman's horse to put on his garden. To have no feelings or the urge to react to these degrading injustices, one had to be reduced to the level of a brute. The marvel in all of this is how quickly the world has forgotten the Protestant bloody struggles to raise man where he is today, ignoring the most obvious and striking contrast between true Christianity and occult Christianity. To race headlong to embrace Rome's deceptive slave system once again. Can it be imagined the intense ferociousness and uncontrollable hatred felt by the aristocratic minds, the Roman Catholic hierarchy, and their ever-scheming Jesuits, when England ran its last Catholic king, James II, off his throne, declaring herself for all time to be Protestant, establishing her Catholic Maryland colony to be also firmly Protestant? Adrenaline and anathemas both ran hot. But it did much more than that. For 58 years following William and Mary's ascension to the throne and the Glorious Revolution in 1688, the exiled Stuarts clung tenaciously to their dream of regaining the kingdom they had lost. The deposed James II at death was succeeded by his son James III, the Old Pretender. He in turn was succeeded as claimant by his son, the Young Pretender, Charles Edward, Bonnie Prince Charlie. Under these three monarchs in exile, Jacobite circles on the continent were to remain hotbeds of conspiracy and political intrigue. Dethroned James II fled England and went again to France, where within several months his cousin, King Louis XIV, assisted him with a fleet and army for the purpose of occupying Ireland and establishing himself there as king. But his efforts only met with total failure and utter defeat. Returning to France for the third time in his life, he died there in 1701. The humiliation so keenly felt by the Stuart aristocracy and Catholic hierarchy from the Protestant Glorious Revolution imbued contagious feelings of bitter resentment and revenge throughout all of Catholic Europe. Conspiracies hummed, with men willing to give their lives, and Rome provided the fuel. The die-hard Jacobite dream served as a rallying call to arouse, recruit, and organize aristocratic Catholic men in their own brotherhood. A brotherhood that was to flourish and live on long after the Jacobite cause was dead. What more perfect vehicle to enable them to conceal and implement their grand designs than through Protestant Freemasonry itself? The Jesuits, masters of intrigue, shrewdly employed the very same system that Protestants had used successfully in their fight against popery. This is the cleverness of this group. Now they used for a direct opposite purpose. So again, the Jesuits, masters of intrigue, shrewdly employed the very same system that Protestants had used successfully in their fight against popery. Now they used for a direct opposite purpose. In the manuscripts of the Prince of Hesse, published by L'École de Chantelot, it is declared that in 1714 the Jesuits used the mysteries of the Rose-Croix. Mirabeau also relates that the Jesuits profited by the internal troubles of the reign of Charles I to possess themselves of the symbols, the allegories, and the carpets of the Rose-Croix Masons, who were only the ancient order of the Templars secretly perpetuated. And out of the Rose-Croix, I'm sure you probably heard the term Rosicrucians and these types of things. Does that ring a bell? Okay. As there were two streams of Reformation in England, one within the English Anglican Church and the other outside of it. As there were two streams of Freemasonry, the original being the Knights Templar, who founded and heralded the Protestant cause, the other, the Roman Catholic countermeasure. The Knights Templar were virtually thrust into their situation to be fugitives on the run, and became protesters of their three enemies: the monarchy, the Hospitallers, and the Church. But as their cause began to firmly take shape among the common people, and the lower parish priests producing the Protestant Revolution, Catholicism, out of a pure necessity to confuse her opposition, formed its own brand of Freemasonry. And to make the confusion and conspiracy that much more effective, appearing even contradictive, popes issued their decrees of condemnation and excommunication against anyone who became a Freemasonry or who became a Freemason, not making a distinction between the two. You see that? Rome gives refuge to Stuart exiles. The high esteem with which the Catholic Church regarded the exiled Stuart kings was nothing less than amazing. After two ill-fated rebellions which James III, the Old Pretender, as he was called by those not sympathetic to his illusions, had actively taken part in, we find him in Rome about 1719 plotting, dedicated as ever to returning the Scottish and English crowns to his family and to returning the British people to the authority of the Pope. The following comments taken from the Catholic Encyclopedia will emphasize the truth of what Rome's position was toward Protestant England and the Stuarts' restoration. From the Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 4, page 30, quote, "He, Pope Clement IV, gave a generous hospitality to the exiled son of James II of England, James Edward Stuart, and helped him to obtain the hand of Clementina, who was the granddaughter of King Sobieski of Poland." And in Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 1, page 260, in 1719, Prime Minister of Spain, Cardinal Giulio Alberoni's scheme was the restoration of the Stuarts to the British throne by the cooperation of the Tsar and the King of Sweden, unquote. And Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 8, page 23, under the subject Pope Innocent XIII, quote, "Like his predecessor, Clement XI, he gave an annual pension to the English pretender, James III, the son of the dethroned Catholic king, James II, and even promised to aid him with 100,000 ducats in case an opportunity should offer itself to regain the English crown by force of arms," unquote. James III had two sons by Princess Clementina. His youngest son was created cardinal at age 22, and the following year was made archpriest of the Vatican. Both he and his father were buried at St. Peter's. Such is the life of the nobility. English Protestant Freemasonry goes public. There were 5 attempts made in all to restore the Stuarts on the British throne, none of which were serious threats. The third rebellion in 1715, the last which James III participated in, was put down so quickly that it was over before he could arrive in Britain to join it. The struggle to return Britain to the Roman Church was effectively broken. The country was firmly ruled by Parliament. There was no need now for the Templars to remain in hiding. 2 years later, on June 24th, 1717, 4 Masonic lodges in London decided to reveal themselves to the world. Now, indeed, secret Masonry had no more need for secrecy, no reason to hide from the establishment, or to plot against the establishment. Freemasonry had become the establishment. It's well known to students of history what the Knights Templar were charged with when first arrested on that unfortunate Friday the 13th of 1307. It is also well documented that the Knights Templar were deep into the occult. On that point, there is no question. But for the sanctimonious Church of Rome, which is the center of occultism, to accuse, torture, and burn members of its own organization for their involvement in the occult and then excommunicate them, hunting them down like animals, has to be the height of recorded hypocrisy. However, in the providence of God, out of the Templars' misfortunes, man was able to free himself from the shackles of Rome. And I gotta emphasize this, that this Knights Templar, the resurrection of the Knights Templar found its resurrection in what is called at this time Protestant Freemasonry. Okay? Not of a religious sense, but of an occultic sense. And this is also a clear-cut example of the feat of iron and clay, and also an example of when you look at Mystery Babylon, the woman that rides the beasts, okay, that there comes a time where the kings of the earth will turn on that woman and go to make war with her and burn her with fire and these types of things. It's mentioned in Revelation. Okay, so again, there is going to be conflict between these systems. Anyways, back to the reading. As condemned men, driven by fear and hatred, seeking ways to survive, the Templars had to make a hasty decision on the opportunities that availed them. Some actually made amends with Rome. A few entered other orders. But the majority remained fugitives, who formed a true secret society unto themselves, fleeing to Scotland or remaining hidden wherever friends or relatives would provide for and conceal them. It is interesting, too, that the vast fleet of the Templars just vanished, and historically have never been found. Could they have become that system of pirates that terrorized the high seas with their blazoned skull and crossbones banner that mariners so often described and Hollywood has glamorized? The skull and crossbones has long been associated with both the Templars and their murdered master. But that was a time when it was a true secret society, not just an organization with secret signs and secret hand grips, but a widespread society whose very existence was a secret. With their success, like the hare running a race with the tortoise, and then taking a nap, apathy set in. Protestantism today is stubbornly asleep. From the time secret Masonry went public in 1717, there began a sharp decline in the vigilance and purpose to keep their society pure, which as fugitives in hiding, they were so fiercely compelled to do. But years before revealing themselves, great men of science who had reason to meet to share their ideas, and in order to avoid the grave dangers of ecclesiastical punishment, suffering the same as astronomer Galileo Galilei, going to prison and even facing death for teaching a scientific truth, met in secret in what was termed an invisible college. Their first known secret meeting was held in 1645, just 3 years after the death of Galileo. As virtually a subsidiary of Freemasonry, they founded the Royal Society of London for the improvement of natural knowledge and became known simply as the Royal Society. And they are still called that today. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, and a similar fire shortly after in Edinburgh, Scotland, the date prompts great suspicion on who was responsible for the fires. Sir Christopher Wren, a Freemason who had been a founder of the Royal Society at the age of 28, acted as supervising architect for 51 churches that were rebuilt after the destroying fire. during the 50 years before Freemasonry revealed itself, these men of science, the engineers, architects, and geometers, were the heroes of the day. As a memorial to Wren's final architectural achievement, the Naval Hospital at Greenwich, a picture can be seen there. Allegorically, it says much. A painting with William and Mary on their throne, and below them cherubs hold a drawing of St. Paul's Cathedral, a tribute to the hospital's architect, Sir Christopher Wren. Another cherub holds a compass in one hand and a square in the other. A short distance away, the papal tiara lies on the ground. Combined with Jacobite aggression and Freemasonry's complacency, after making themselves known publicly in 1717, subversive changes rapidly took place. When once fear and hatred had been dispelled and they were comfortable in their security, logically, just how far apart were the original devoted Catholic Knights Templar and those dedicated to the Catholic Jacobite cause? Wasn't this one of the alarms fostered by Philip IV of France when he first had the Templars arrested? That in their ambitious designs they dreamed of a state or principality of their own, a principality encompassing territory to which Philip had laid claim? And were they not also suspected of a much more ambitious, more grandiose geopolitical design, wealth to buy the world? With great finesse and subtlety, the Jesuits' most treasured expertise, the two opposing factions of Freemasonry were united. Not working for either the Protestant or Jacobite cause, but instead the grand design of Jesuitry. To the skeptical reader, it must be pointed out that the most successful conspiracies are never discovered. Like the wind, it is not seen, only by the effects is it known. How then can we expect to unravel the conspiracy of all conspiracies by merely human means? We cannot. We therefore need the Bible to give us that discernment. The scriptures have something to say about Rome, its Antichrist, about deception and conspiracy, about end-time world religion and government. The Bible must be our sure foundation. Today we see an accelerating trend towards both a global government and uniting of religions, clear from media reporting, just as Scripture has taught us for end times. Many books written tell us of a world conspiracy. However, strangely, conspiracy watchers, when it comes to Rome, always seem to lose the scent. Even when Jesuit Malachi Martin, in his best-selling book, The Keys of This Blood, graphically tells us that Rome is a global contender. The task of following the developments of Freemasonry is formidable. And the thin line of whether one embraced or opposed Catholicism makes following the trail that much more complex. But add to that the confusion of the Jesuit element, then everything really seems to blur. And intentionally so. Historical fact: England became Protestant amidst great struggles and bloodshed, opposing Catholicism. At the very same time, the European continent was being decimated by wars involving the exact same issue. Historical fact: England, separated by her Channel moat, became a refuge and bastion for hundreds of thousands of Protestants fleeing the continent's horrors. Historical fact: in England, men of letters and science from London, Oxford, and Cambridge met in their invisible college, quote-unquote, secretly, away from the eyes and ears of the church, 70 years before Freemasonry went public. It was during these years that the two factions began to overlap, the Jesuits being foremost as active agents of that change. English Freemasonry infiltrated by Jesuits. Some very interesting comments taken from a book written in 1798 titled Proofs of a Conspiracy by Professor John Robison, a Scottish Protestant, will shed some light on the Jesuit subversions taking place in the lodges of Freemasonry from 1648 till his own time. In his chapter, Schisms in Freemasonry, page 12 and 13, he states, and before I read the quote, I just want to remind the listeners that again, just like with each chapter, I will go ahead and put all the resources that John Daniel uses in the description box as pertaining to the chapter we are in. So you can go and look up these writings yourself, or if you can't find them online, you can just simply maybe go to a library or just purchase it online or wherever. But let's read the quote from Proofs of a Conspiracy. Schisms in Freemasonry, page 12 and 13, he states, quote, I have met with many particular facts, which convince me that this use had been made of the meetings of Masons, and that at this time the Jesuits interfered considerably, insinuating themselves into the lodges, and contributing to increase that religious mysticism that is to be observed in all the ceremonies of the order. We also know that Charles II was made a Mason, and frequented the lodges. His brother and successor James II, he did not frequent the lodges. Page 15. The lodges in France naturally became the rendezvous of the adherents to their banished king, and the means of carrying on a correspondence with their friends in England. At this time, also, the Jesuits took a more active hand in Freemasonry than ever. They insinuated themselves into the English lodges, where they were caressed by the Catholics, who panted after the reestablishment of their faith, and tolerated by the Protestant royalists, who thought no concession too great a compensation for their services. At this time, changes were made in some of the Masonic symbols, particularly in the tracing of the lodge, which bear evident marks of Jesuitical interference. And page 17. In all this progressive mummery, we see much of the hand of the Jesuits, and it would seem that it was encouraged by the Church. It must be seen that these men, who take such great pride in being a Jesuit, surely would have been active in the place, and in a way to be most effective in accomplishing their order's goal. To contend that Jesuits were not involved in Freemasonry would have to be a severe discredit to the Jesuit image. And I think this will be a good spot for us to close this reading, and we will pick up next time, continuing in chapter 9, the Freemasonry Metamorphosis. I want to thank you for listening. Truth be told, truth be known. Stay safe. God bless you, and we will see you in the next reading. God bless. Bye-bye.